much less when the doubts are illegitimate in the sense that they have no real or logical basis, such as the problem in question. Apparently, in our discussion, which took place a long time ago, and which, as I was pleased to learn, had not been forgotten by you, has nevertheless not cleared up this matter in your mind. I will attempt to do now in writing, which imposes both brevity and other limitations. I trust that the following remarks will serve the purpose. Basically, the problem has its roots in a misconception of the scientific method, or simply of what science is. We must distinguish between empirical or experimental science, dealing with and confirmed to, describing and classifying science dealing with observable phenomena, and speculative science dealing with unknown phenomena, sometimes phenomena that cannot be duplicated in the laboratory. Scientific speculation is actually a terminological incongruity, for science, strictly speaking, means knowledge, while no speculation can be called knowledge in the strict sense of the word. At best, science can only speak in terms of theories inferred from certain known facts and applied in the realm of the unknown. Here, science has two general methods of inference. A, the method of interpolation, as distinguished from extrapolation, whereby, knowing the reaction under two extremes, we attempt to infer what the reaction might be at any point between the two. And B, the method of extrapolation, whereby inferences are made beyond a known range on the basis of certain variables within the known range. For example, suppose we know the variables of a certain element within a temperature range of 0 to 100 degrees. And on the basis of this, we estimate what the reaction might be at 101, 200, or 2,000 degrees. Of the two methods, the second, extrapolation, is clearly the more uncertain. Moreover, the uncertainty increases with the distance away from the known range and with the decrease of the range. Thus, if it is the known range is between 0 and 100 degrees, our inference at 101 degrees has a greater probability than at 1,001 degrees. Let us note at once that all speculation regarding the origin and age of the world comes within the second and weaker method, that of extrapolation. The weakness becomes more apparent if we bear in mind that a generalization inferred from a known consequent to an unknown antecedent is more speculative than an inference from an antecedent to consequent. That an inference from consequent to antecedent is more speculative than an inference from antecedent to consequent can be demonstrated very simply. 4 divided by 2 equals 2. Here the antecedent is represented by the dividend and divisor, and the consequent by the quotient. Knowing the antecedent in this case gives us one possible result, the quotient, the number 2. However, if we know only the end result, namely the number 2, and we ask ourselves, how can we arrive at the number 2? The answer permits several possibilities. Arrive at it by means of different methods. A, 1 plus 1 equals 2. B, 4 minus 2 equals 2. C, 1 times 2 equals 2. D, 4 divided by 2 equals 2. Note that if other numbers are to come into play, the number of possibilities giving under the same result is infinite, since 5 minus 3 also equals 2, 6 divided by 3 equals 2, etc. ad infinitum. Add to this another difficulty, which is prevalent in all methods of induction. Conclusions based on certain known data, when they are ampliative in nature, meaning when they are extended to an unknown areas, can have any validity at all on the assumption of everything else being equal. That is to say, on identity of prevailing conditions and their action and counteraction upon each other. If we cannot be sure that the variations or changes would bear at least a close relationship to the existing variables in degree, if we cannot be sure that the changes would bear any resemblance in kind, if furthermore we cannot be sure that there were not other factors involved, well, such conclusions or inference are absolutely valueless. For further illustration, I'll refer to one of the points which I believe I mentioned during our conversation. In a chemical reaction, whether fissional or fusional, the introduction of a new catalyzer into the process, however minute the quantity of this new catalyzer may be, may change the whole tempo and form of the chemical process or start an entirely new process. We are not yet through with the difficulties inherent in so-called scientific theories concerning the origin of the world. Let us remember that the whole structure of science is based on observance of reactions and processes in the behavior of atoms in their present state, as they now exist in nature. Scientists deal with conglomerations of billions of atoms as these are already bound together, and as these relate to other existing conglomerations of atoms. Scientists know very little of the atoms in their pristine state, of how one single atom may react on another single atom in a state of separateness, much less of how parts of a single atom may react on other parts of the same or other atoms. One thing science considers certain, to the extent that any science can be certain, namely that the reaction of single atoms upon each other is totally different from the reactions of one conglomeration of atoms to another. We may now summarize the weaknesses, nay hopelessness, of all so-called scientific theories regarding the origin and age of our universe. A. These theories have been advanced on the basis of observable data during a relatively short period of time, of only a number of decades, and at any rate not more than a couple of centuries. B. On the basis of such a relatively small range of known, though by no means perfect data, scientists ventured to build theories by the weak method of extrapolation, and from the consequence to the antecedent, extending to many thousands, according to them, to millions and billions of years. C. In advancing such theories, they blithely disregard factors universally admitted by all scientists, namely, that in the initial period of the birth of the universe, conditions of temperature, atmospheric pressure, radioactivity, and a host of other catalytic factors were totally different from those existing in the present state of the universe. And D, the consequence of scientific opinion is there must have been many radioactive elements in the initial stage which now no longer exist or exist only in minimal quantities. Some of them elements the catalytic potency of which is known even in minimal doses. And E, the formation of the world. If we are to accept these theories, began with a process of colligation, of binding together of single atoms or the components of the atom and their conglomeration and consolidations involving totally unknown processes and variables. In short, of all the weak scientific theories, those which deal with the origin of the cosmos and with its dating are admittedly by the scientists themselves the weakest of the weak. It is small wonder, and this, incidentally, is one of the obvious refutations of these theories, that the various scientific theories concerning the age of the universe not only contradict each other, but some of them are quite incompatible and mutually exclusive, since the maximum date of one theory is less than the minimum date of another. If anyone accepts such a theory uncritically, it can only lead him into fallacious and inconsequential reasoning. Consider, for example, the so-called evolutionary theory of the origin of the world, which is based on the assumption that the universe evolved out of existence atomic and subatomic particles, which by an evolutionary process combined to form the physical universe and our planet, on which organic life somehow developed also by an evolutionary process until Homo sapiens emerged. It is hard to understand why one should readily accept the creation of atomic and subatomic particles in a state which is admittedly unknowable and inconceivable, yet should be reluctant to accept the creation of planets or organisms or a human being as we know even to exist. The argument from the discovery of fossils is by no means conclusive evidence of the great antiquity of the earth for the following reasons. A. In view of the unknown conditions which existed in prehistoric times, conditions of atmospheric pressures, temperatures, radioactivity, unknown catalyzers, etc., as already mentioned, conditions that is which could have caused reactions and changes of an entirely different nature and tempo from those known unto the present day, orderly process of nature, one cannot exclude the possibility that dinosaurs existed 5,700, that year was 22 years ago, and became fossilized under terrific natural cataclysms in the course of a few years rather than millions of years, since we have no conceivable measurements or criteria of calculations under those unknown conditions. And B, even assuming that the period of time which the Torah allows for the age of the world is definitely too short for fossilization, although I don't see how one can be so categorical, we can still readily accept the possibility that God created ready fossils, bones, or skeletons for reasons best known to him, just as he could create ready living organisms, a complete man, and such ready products as oil, coal, or diamonds without any evolutionary process. As for the question, if it be true as above, B, why did God have to create fossils in the first place? The answer is simple. We cannot know the reason why God chose a manner of creation in preference to another, and whatever theory of creation is accepted, the question will always remain unanswered. The question, why create a fossil, is no more valid than the question, why create an atom? Certainly, such a question cannot serve as a sound argument, much less as a logical basis for the evolutionary theory. What scientific basis is there for limiting the creative process to an evolutionary process only, starting with atomic and subatomic particles, a theory full of unexplained gaps and complications, while excluding the possibility of creation as given by the biblical account? For if the latter possibility be admitted, everything falls neatly into pattern, and all speculation regarding the origin and age of the world becomes unnecessary and irrelevant. It is surely no argument to question this possibility by saying, why should the Creator create a finished universe when it would have been sufficient for him to create an adequate number of atoms or subatomic particles with the power of conjugation and evolution to develop into the present cosmic order? The absurdity of this argument becomes even more obvious when it is made in the basis of flimsy theory, as if we're based on sound and irrefutable arguments overriding all other possibilities. The question may be asked, if the theories attempting to explain the origin and age of the world are so weak, how could they have been advanced in the first place? The answer is simple. It is a matter of human nature to seek an explanation for everything in the environment, and in any theory, however far-fetched, is better than none, at least until a more feasible explanation can be devised. You may now ask, in the absence of a sounder theory, why then isn't the biblical account of creation accepted by these scientists? The answer again is to be found in human nature. It is a natural human ambition to be inventive and original. To accept the biblical account deprives one of the opportunity to show one's analytical and inductive ingenuity. Hence, disregarding the biblical account, the scientist must devise reasons to justify his doing so, and he takes refuge in classifying it with ancient and primitive mythology and the like, since he cannot really argue against it on scientific grounds. If you are still troubled by the theory of evolution, I can tell you without fear of contradiction that it is not a shred of evidence to support it. On the contrary, during the years of research and investigation, since the theory was first advanced, it had been possible to observe thousands of generations, yet it has never been possible to establish a transmutation from one species into another, much less to turn a plant into an animal. And such a theory can have no place in the arsenal of empirical science. The theory of science to which reference has been made actually has no bearing on the Torah account of creation. For even if the theory of evolution was substantiated today, and the mutation of species were proven in laboratory tests, this would still not contradict the possibility of the world having been created as stated in the Torah, rather than through the evolutionary process. The main purpose of citing the evolutionary theory was to illustrate how a highly speculative and scientifically unsound theory can capture the imagination of the uncritical, so much so that it is even offered as a scientific explanation of the mystery of creation, despite the fact that the theory of evolution itself has not been substantiated scientifically and is devoid of any real scientific basis. Needless to say, it is not my intent to cast aspersions on science or to discredit the scientific method. Science cannot operate except by a certain criteria, working theories or hypotheses, even if they cannot be verified, though some theories die hard even when they are scientifically refuted or discredited. The evolutionary theory is a case in point. No technical progress would be possible unless certain physical laws are accepted, even though there is no guarantee that the law will repeat itself. However, I do wish to emphasize, as already mentioned, that science has to do only with theories, but not with certainties. All scientific conclusions or generalizations can only be probable in a greater or lesser degree according to the precautions taken in the use of the available evidence, and the degree of probability necessarily decreases with the distance from the empirical facts, or with the increase of the unknown variables, etc., as already indicated. If you will bear this in mind, you will readily realize that there can be no real conflict between any scientific theory and the Torah. My above remarks have turned out somewhat lengthier than intended, but they are still all too brief in relation to the misconception and confusion prevailing in many minds. Moreover, my remarks had to be confined to general observations, as this is hardly the medium to go into greater detail. If you have any further questions, do not hesitate to write to me. To conclude on a note touched upon in our conversation, the mitzvah of putting on tefillin the phylacteries every weekday on the hand facing the heart, and on the head, the seat of the intellect, indicates, among other things, the true Jewish approach. Performance first, the hand, with sincerity and wholeheartedness, followed by the intellectual comprehension, the head. That means you do first, nasa, and then v'nishma, as it says in Hebrew, you do. May the Spirit permeate your intellect and arouse your emotive powers and find expression in every aspect of the daily life, for the essential thing is the deed. This is a long letter, but shows you, I think, first of all, obviously the point which the Rebbe wanted, Lubavitcher Rebbe wanted to bring across was about science and evolution and how there really isn't or cannot be a contradiction between the two, and we just have to work hard a little bit in science to understand the contradictions, or seemingly contradictions between the two. And number two, it just impressed upon you that even though the Lubavitcher Rebbe is a great man, and surely in the Torah viewpoint, nevertheless also you could see in the science he has a tremendous grasp of science also. Well, saying that about Torah and science and keeping on the subject, here's something about another letter from the Rebbe about Torah and science. The following letter was sent to the editor of Intercom magazine, the Association of Orthodox Jewish Scientists. Shalom ubracha, meaning peace and blessing. Although I do not know you personally, I am taking the liberty of writing to you, having just received the letter from August 71, or of 5731 issue of Intercom with your article in it. I find myself in agreement with some points brought out in your article, which encourages me in hope that as editor and influential member of your association, you may be able to give new impetus to the association and its members, and especially help clear up once and for all certain misconceptions, which, as it seems to me, are still troubling some Orthodox Jewish scientists. Specifically, I find it incomprehensible and regrettable that some of our Orthodox Jewish scientists still invest an apologetic attitude vis-a-vis science and certain scientific theories. This is evident also in some articles in the present Intercom, and I have seen it also in personal discussions with genuinely frum Orthodox scientists. To put it bluntly, some Orthodox scientists seem to be ashamed to declare openly their adherence to such basic tenets of the Torah, as for example that God created Adam and Eve, or the possibility of a miracle innate in the present day and age, as a miracle is defined in Torah, namely an occurrence in defiance of the so-called laws of nature. When I asked them squarely how do they reconcile this lack of conviction in basic Torah matters with whatever every believing Jew believes and professes, the answer was that they have managed to departmentalize their day, the prayers and the Torah, etc., being in one department and science in another. Needless to say, such an attitude is untenable. For when a Jew declares daily, Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem is really the God, Eino od milvado, there's nobody else besides him, it is plainly meant that this is for the whole day, not a part of the day. Moreover, scientists with such a split personality is a contradiction also to the concept of Hashem Echad, or that God is one, or as our rabbis expressed it, Echad, meaning made up of the three Hebrew letters of Aleph, Ches, and Dalet. The Aleph, which is number one letter, is the ruler of the world, number one. The rules not only in the seven heavens, but also on earth, which is the Ches, the second letter of the Echad is 8, 7 heavens and 1 earth, and in all the 4 directions, which is represented by the Dalet. As for the matter of miracles, as it affects our daily life, the Torah view is clear. It is rules that one should not rely on a miracle, but at the same time it requires every Jew to be permeated with complete faith that God acts through nature and also above nature. This is also the plain meaning of the sentence that says, and God your God will bless you in all that you do. It is necessary to do, not rely on miracles. Ultimately the blessing comes from God. To think otherwise would also be contradictory to our 3 daily prayers. The blessings in the Amidah are clearly based on the conviction that God can interfere with nature, meaning help the sick, bless the crops, even where the natural forces are unfavorable. Unless one believes in God's omnipotence and personal interest in every individual's daily life, there is no sense in praying to him and asking him for his blessings. Of course, when a Jew finds himself in an environment of non-believers, it is difficult to be different and face possible ridicule. But this too has already been forewarned in by the Code of Jewish Law. At the beginning of the very first volume, it says, lays down the basic principle for the fulfillment of all the 4 volumes. And let him not be ashamed in the face of men who may scoff at him in the service of God. What is even more surprising, and yet I have not received any answer from those with whom I have occasion to speak on this matter, is that the set apologetic attitude is completely out of harmony with the view of contemporary science. If a century ago, when scientists still spoke in terms of absolute truth, well, it was understandable why a person who wished to adhere to his faith might have been embarrassed to challenge scientific claims. This is no longer the case in our day and age. Contemporary science no longer lays claims to absolutes. The principle of probability now reigns supreme, even in practical sciences applied in common daily experiences. Certainly in such realms as the origin of the universe, the origin of life on Earth, the origin of the species, where theories are based on speculative extrapolation, and even more so in the realm of pure science, where everything is based on assumed premises, if we assume that, etc., that it follows then, etc., scientists do not deal with certainties. Need one remind our Orthodox Jewish scientists who still feels embarrassed about some old-fashioned Torah truths in the face of scientific hypotheses that Heisenberg's principle of indeterminacy has finally done away with the traditional scientific notion that cause and effect are mechanically linked, so that it is now quite unscientific to hold that one event is inevitably a consequence of another, but only most probable. Most scientists have accepted this principle of uncertainty, written by Werner Heisenberg in 1927, as being intrinsic to the whole universe. The 19th century dogmatic, mechanistic, and deterministic attitude of science is gone. The modern scientist no longer accepts to find truth in science. The current and universally accepted view of science itself is that science must reconcile itself to the idea that whatever progress it makes, it will always deal with probabilities, not with certainties or absolutes. Needless to say, it is not my intention to belittle science, applied or speculative, and especially for quite another reason. For as a matter of fact, the Torah bestows upon science, in certain areas at least, a validity much greater than contemporary science itself claims. The law accepts scientific findings in many instances not as possible or probable, but certain and true. There is surely no need to elaborate to you on this. In the light of what has been said about it, there is no basis whatsoever for any religious Jewish scientist to be embarrassed, since modern science cannot legitimately, and I mean legitimately, even from the viewpoint of science itself, challenge Torah from Mount Sinai. Well, this is a beautiful idea, and just again to show, I think, to our viewers that Torah and science are not a contradiction, and we will continue this even next week because it really is such a major idea. People come to me, and of course, it's been said so many things. How can you have the Bible and the Torah reconcile itself with the science? So I hope this clears up the views of many of the people, and we'll see you next week.